Hi there, my name is Memo, this is my channel Houseplanty Goodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion, which you might be able to see around me. It's tropical houseplants. Now I'd like to start with a bit of an apology. I've been away for a couple of weeks. I've been doing a lot of stuff on the house, so essentially I was able to take a couple of days off here and there and do some painting around the house, wire up some electricals, shocking. But it just basically meant that I didn't have an awful lot of time to do some filming, but regular videos should be recommencing as of right now. And I thought in order to kind of kick back into things, I'd start with something a bit more fun and something that people have requested. I was meaning to do this a while ago, but we can start picking this up again. And that is a plant shelf tour. I did one of the plant shelves, and I think I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 plant shelves to go through in total. So there's one that's already been done and we're going on to a second one. And the reason I wanted to do this one today is because this is a new plant shelf that I got yesterday, mainly because I needed to move plants onto it that are getting quite large and quite tall basically, and these plants tended to be on the top of some of my other shelves and they were hitting the glass ceiling of the conservatory or hothouse essentially. So I thought I'd kind of give them their own little space just so that they can actually not have that ceiling to hit essentially, and see how large I can get them. Granted, there are going to be some of these plants that are going to be chopped and propped. Some of them, one of them specifically, the Melanocrism that you can see at the back, the top leaf and new leaf that's coming out is getting chopped and is getting given to a very dear local planty friend. I am just waiting for the aerial roots to establish a bit more, just to give her the best chance of being able to root it out and get going with it. So yeah, shall we dive in? I'll be picking up the plants and bringing them up one at a time, basically, just so you can kind of see the plants that I'm talking about. So starting on the bottom shelf, let's start with the easiest one to pick up, which is a small rooted cutting. And this, and I'll bring this in a bit closer to the camera, you might be able to see the leaf there. I'm also trying to not tip it too much because it's in pond and it's got a water reservoir at the bottom. So this is a Rye Affinity. Quite what the Affinity is at the moment, or what it's been hybridized with, I'm not entirely sure. It's not as silver as some other solderoys that you can see from other people basically, so I'm not sure. It's a beautiful plant. However, I got this maybe a couple of months ago now. There's a new caterpillar that's coming in, so there's a new leaf right there. So excited about that. But yeah, pretty much got this straight into pond and it's loving life. I'm also just realizing now that the roots are coming down at the bottom. It's been a relatively easy plant to take care of. Actually, I've kind of ignored it. As long as the water reservoir has been filled, it seems to be doing relatively well. I'm just kind of trying to see if there's any pests on it. No, but this was actually on one of the lower shelves, so it's getting very, very little light. So I'm assuming that might be why I'm not getting the silver coming through as strongly. But there's definitely still some great veination and some great subdued silver hues, I should say, on this plant. So yeah, very, very cool. Let me pick up the next one. Right, the next one is one that I'm going to have to hold the support stick because on the actual shelf itself, it is, so you can see it's quite a large plant. I always find it quite interesting with some of these plants. So this is a Philodendron White Princess. I don't know if you might be able to see, but I've actually cut off one of the leaves that was there because it came in and it was fully white. So I wanted to give a chance to the next leaf to have a bit more energy, and I can see the new leaf that is coming through right there, that it actually has got some green on it, which is good. But yeah, the one thing that I'm finding quite interesting with some of these plants that I've got when they're much smaller and they get much larger with larger leaves, especially because I'm giving them support sticks, is that the stem at the bottom doesn't really ever get much thicker, but the stem at the top is a lot thicker, so it can be a bit of a challenging, especially because I've only got them on support sticks instead of moss poles, which would probably give it a bit more support. It's still liking the support because the leaves are coming in quite large, and you can see that there if I kind of bring that in a bit closer to the camera. And it's got a decent level of white. For me, I'm comfortable with some of these leaves that are coming through a bit more speckled because it means it's got a bit more energy for the rest of the plant. But yep, in a terracotta pot, in my usual aroid soil mix. But yeah, and actually I think the reason why the stem at the bottom tends to be a bit thinner than at the top is because if you'd imagine if this was growing in nature and it was growing up a tree, it doesn't need to have an awful lot of strength at the bottom because usually the aerial roots will attach to something like the trunk of the tree, so it gets the strength from there. No doubt if it gets very, very big, the bottom part of the stem that goes into the soil will get a bit thicker, but it kind of does make sense a bit in that respect. So right, let me put this down and I'll pick up another one. Right, the next plant that I want to talk about is this. And this might be something that not a lot of people will recognize. Again, terracotta pot, arid soil mix. This is an Epipremnum Amplicium. So hopefully you might be able to see what makes this slightly different from other Epipremnum. So obviously it's got very, very long, like sword-shaped leaves. And sometimes you get ones that have got a silver or bluish hue. This one isn't, this is just a standard green one I got a while ago. This was a lot larger and a lot bushier, but the problem that I was finding with this plant is on the support, on the moss pole actually, rather than a support stick. Shocking! Some of my plants do actually have moss poles, or cocoa coir poles basically. This is a prolific plant to send out runners like you might be able to see here, and there was a lot of runners and it wasn't bringing out any new leaves, so I pretty much chopped it back down to 1 or 2 leaves and it's since pushed out a lot more growth. I have also propagated the node cuttings and also water propagated some of the leaf cuttings, some of the nodes that had leaves on them, and they're doing quite well. I will be moving those into pond just to kind of see how they're going to do. But the interesting thing about this for an Epipremnum, most times Epipremnums, you generally, like most pothos plants, you generally would like them to go dry before you water them. Otherwise, you do run the risk a bit of root rot. This one, from what I could see online and from some of the research that I was doing, is one that grows in slightly wetter conditions. So it does generally like its soil to be kept a bit more on the moist side. Not to the same level as a calathea or an alocasia or a colocasia, but it does like to be a bit more moist than the usual pothos varieties, essentially. But very, very cool plant. If you ever do have a chance to get an Epipremnum Amplicium, do definitely grab one of these. They're very, very, very cool. Right, let me put this back down and go on to the next plant. So another plant that I need to kind of hold up because it's kind of wobbly on its support stick, again for the same reason that you've got a very, very thin stem at the bottom there and it gets much thicker at the top. This, and hopefully you might be able to see if I tilt it enough, it's a very, very awkward growing philodendron. This is a Philodendron Dark Lord. And I'm so super happy that I'm finally getting some mature leaves that have got some of the redness at the back of the leaves. This one's a relatively fresh leaf, but it's kind of started to harden off already, so you don't really get that bright, bright red. But you do get very, very nice dark foliage. The one thing I will say about this, the petioles and the stem have got like a nice reddish maroony color. But the one thing I will say, and you might be able to see, the petiole to leaf is quite large, and this was at the top of a plant shelf, so it was getting quite decent light. It wasn't necessarily pulling towards the light. So yeah, this is one that does require a lot of space around, basically. So if you do want to get one of these, just bear that in mind. But overall, this is in a net pot, and it's in my usual aroid soil mix. Apologies for looking up at that point in time, but I've got a ceiling fan and I'm really worried that if I move this too close to the ceiling fan, there's going to be some carnage. But you can see it's a very, very happy plant if you just see the level of aerial roots that are coming off this. This might be another one that I do need to chop and prop at some point, just to kind of see if I can limit some of its height and maybe get it to bush out a bit more, and maybe see if I can do anything about growing shorter petioles. I don't know. I think this might be the way that this plant will grow, which isn't as much of an issue when it's growing up a tree again, because a lot of the times you'll get the leaves, you'll get the stem attached to the bark, or yeah, the bark of the tree, essentially the tree trunk, and all the leaves will be facing one way, so probably the petiole isn't that much of an issue at that point. But when it's growing all the way around like this, because it's got a support stick, it can be a bit cumbersome. So right, let me put this down and I'll grab the next plant. Right, the next plant is propagation, so it's looking a bit worse for wear, at least a new leaf, but that's normal when it comes to propagations. This is a top cutting from my Epipremnum Penultim, which has not only got large leaves. Let me just do a head test for size so you can see. It's also got fenestrations already, and I don't know whether or not you might be able to see if I bring it in a bit closer, it is starting to get the secondary fenestrations on the midrib of the leaf, and that is the holes that you get in the middle of the leaf. So very reminiscent of kind of what you would get maybe with a monstera. But a lot of people don't realize that a lot of epipremnums, a lot of pothos plants will actually fenestrate when they start getting larger. This is one that did take quite a while to start fenestrating. I think I've had this in my collection for going on nearly 3 years now. And I know some people can get them to fenestrate a bit faster. It took a bit longer in my care. I'm also just looking for pests. Is that a pest? No. You can usually tell from most of my videos where I'm just like, this is a good opportunity. Let's see if there's any pests whilst I'm holding this plant up. But this is doing okay for now. I can't see any roots. I've got it in a clear pint glass, plastic pint glass that's in pond. I don't see any roots picking out quite yet. You could see the, whilst dropping water everywhere from the reservoir, but you might be able to see the newest leaf that was quite mature, sorry, quite fresh and soft when I took the cutting is struggling. It looks like it's going to die off. That is normal. The other two leaves seem to be doing quite well. They seem to be relatively plump, so I have no concerns that this is going to root out quite quickly. And yeah, get a new Epipremnum Penultim. This was a bit of a test to see that if I cut a plant with more mature leaves, specifically the Penultim, whether or not it will revert all the way back down to, I'm assuming the first leaf will be an immature leaf without any fenestrations, but whether or not it will start off quite quickly going towards fenestrated mature leaves. Fingers crossed, hopefully that will be what happens. Right, let me put this down, dry my hands off because I am dripping with water, and move on to the next plant. Right, the next plant is another small rooted cutting that I got. It's also in pon. This is the Philodendron Tenu or Tenue. So the leaves are taking its time to come out. This one came out a bit more of a weird shape. It seems to be pulling through. It's still got some of the ruffles that this is the original leaf that I got with it, but it's in pon. It's got a water reservoir. It's on a little small janky support stick. It's getting a new leaf that's coming in at the moment. This was again on a shelf that was getting slightly less light than I probably would have liked it. It was still doing okay, but it wasn't living its best life. So I thought I'd give it a bit more light within this plant shelf here. So it's a bit higher now, and hopefully I'll start getting some larger leaves, and more frequent leaves would be good. I know we're coming into autumn and soon coming into winter as well, so this will slow down in its growth, but it's just kept on keeping on really. So really, really cool plant. I know a lot of people rave about them. It's a highly underrated plant in my opinion. I think this should be getting a lot more of a spotlight than it actually is. Purely because, again, it's a relatively easy philodendron. It's got those really cool ripples that you'll get on the leaves. It kind of harkens a bit to the Anthurium beechii or the King Anthurium. But yeah, very, very cool plant. And it's been a joy kind of growing this. Hopefully this will get a lot larger, basically. So yeah, right, let me pick up another plant and let's talk about that. Okay, the next plant that I want to talk about is one that I haven't got a proper ID for. So this is a philodendron, but I think this might be an emerald green. I'm not entirely sure, but I got it, and you might be able to see if I bring in one of the original leaves, you can see how small it was. This was in a bargain basement area of a plant shop. Let me see if I can bring it in. I've also got a water reservoir underneath it, otherwise it's going to drip everywhere. You can see the leaves are relatively large. Trying to not snap the leaf from the cataphyll. This has recently also been transported into or transplanted into pon. You might be able to see that a lot of my plants have moved into pon rather than my usual aroid soil mix, mainly because it takes me forever to water my plants. So with pon, I found that I have to water a bit less frequently and I have less of a risk of root rot. So a lot of them are moving over to pon. My mailman hates me at the moment because I'm getting frequent orders of 18 kilos, I think it's 18 kilos, of the Lechuza pon substrate. So I don't think they particularly like me right now, but it's fine. But you can see there's a new leaf coming in, so it's not really taken much of a hit by being moved into pon, because this leaf was starting to emerge when I moved it into pon. I thought it might basically reject it or kind of kill it off just so it can kind of bounce back from the pon, but it's not skipped a beat really. If anybody knows what this plant might be, I don't know whether or not you need a bit more information from me, let me know and I can always send you pictures. I can put it on my Instagram. My Instagram will be below in the video description, so if you've not followed me on there yet, please do consider following. I get loads of my subscribers from YouTube coming onto there and asking me loads of questions. I'm more than happy to have chats with you guys. But yeah, really, really cool. No ID, at least for me, philodendron, because when I bought it, it was philodendron. I can't remember what it was. Maybe this was labeled as domesticum. I don't know. It was labeled as something that when I looked at it online, I'm just like, I don't think that's what it is. This has been a very, very slow growing philodendron, maybe because it's kind of always been a bit neglected and it's kind of not got the best light and all of these things. So I don't know. This was also a very, very airy mix, almost to the same level as an orchid. So obviously it needed a bit longer to kind of get going. But yeah, like it nonetheless. Again, this is one of those plants that's got a nice story behind it. So it's got a bit of a good memory for me. So I don't mind keeping it around for a bit longer, basically. But yeah, let me put this back and I will grab another plant and we can have a look at that. So next plant is the Philodendron Podatum, and again, you might be able to see this is a relatively large or tall plant, and I don't think I can even get the whole thing in the frame. There you go. If I just go a bit lower, you might be able to see the very top of the plant there. But very, very cool. I've taken some cuttings from this. I've rooted them out. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this might have gone on a giveaway, like one of the rooted cuttings might have gone on the giveaway on my Instagram. I'm not entirely sure, but I have got some of the cuttings rooted and growing quite nicely. This is one that's a relatively small one. Again, this was on top of shelves, so surprising that you get these very, very long petioles. But you might be able to see one of the more immature leaves there, and hopefully the camera is picking it up, and then maybe I can show you one of the slightly more mature leaves at the top. You can see everything becomes a lot more pronounced. The lobes become a lot more pronounced. I do prefer the more mature version of this leaf, and I think from watching Legends of Monstera and a recent series of videos that they did on SoCal Tropicals, they were saying that this is a good plant that when you do chop it back and then propagate it and it's got a slightly more mature leaf form, it will pretty much not skip a beat and keep pushing out more mature leaves from that point onwards. The really interesting thing that I've noticed now, obviously, and I don't know whether or not this is going to pick up, if I bring it in a bit closer, you might be able to see, obviously it's got a green back, but it's got that really kind of dark brown, kind of almost maroon mid-vein, mid-ribbing basically there, which is kind of cool. But yeah, I'll put this back down because this is one that really worries me because it is very, very top heavy. This is definitely going to be one that I'm going to need to take a cutting and root it out soon, purely because, yeah, I'm a bit worried it's going to snap in half. But so not only do I have this on janky support sticks, there's also plant ties that are then tying the plant and its support to the actual pole of the shelf that you might be able to see here, purely because, again, I need a bit more support. Right, let me put this down and I'll pick up the next plant. Right, the next plant on the shelf is, and you might be able to see this from the leaf here, this is a Philodendron Florida Ghost. And this is a slightly more juvenile leaf than you can see previously. And again, you can see some of the other leaves have got the minty color, which just means it's fading from white into full green. Sometimes with this specific plant, it doesn't ever really go all the way back down to a green. That leaf's been there for nearly 2 years, and I don't think that's going to be changing color to any more green than it kind of is at the moment. You can see some of the top leaves are slightly greener, and I don't know why. Again, this was getting quite a lot of light. Actually, no, scrap that. I do know why. These started going a bit greener the moment that I put the shade cloth on top of the ceiling or the roof of the conservatory, mainly because this plant was loving a lot of light, and I've been through this in a previous video that if you want to keep the white leaves as white or creamy as possible on a Philodendron Florida Ghost, give it a lot of light, to the point that this plant was fine. It wasn't scorching, it wasn't bleaching out or anything like that, but because before I had the shade cloth, everything else that I had around it was starting to get sun stressed or bleaching or burning essentially of the leaves. So I had to put a bit of shade cloth and sacrifice some of the whiter, creamier leaves for some slightly greener leaves, or ones that didn't stay white for very, very long. That answers the question for this plant of when you take cutting, does it come back in a more mature leaf? Yes, this is more mature than when I first got this plant, which was really, really immature, but I'm assuming after the next leaf or two, it will start becoming slightly more mature leaves like what you were seeing down below. And since cutting it and releasing the apical dominance, again, we've talked about apical dominance in one of my previous videos. That's when you snip the main stem and essentially it pushes out side branches so you get a bushier plant. I've got 3 growth points that have come out from the one growth point now, so it should be a much more bushy plant. This is in a net pot, and this is still in my chunky aroid soil mix. This might be one that I might, I'm just trying to look at the roots at the bottom. It's not too bad. This might be one that eventually moves into pon as well. Right, let me put this down and I'll move on to the next plant. So the next plant on the list is or on the shelf specifically, is the Philodendron, and you might be able to see this if I bring this in a bit higher, Plough Maniai. And this is not a great example of a Plough Maniai because it doesn't have quite a lot of that silver on the leaves. And again, this was a plant that was on a lower shelf, so wasn't getting quite as much light as it probably liked in order to keep some of its silveriness. So I brought it up a bit higher. This is also in pond. This is in a water reservoir. The roots have not come out the bottom yet, which is good. But if I'm not mistaken, from the research that I've done and from what I'm seeing from this plant, this is also a crawler or a scrambler, very similar to the Philodendron gloriosum and the Pastazanum. So it will grow along the soil and up, so it will never get particularly high. The petioles, or the leaf stems, as people might recognize them, will become larger and the leaves will get larger, but it will only ever grow so much because it's not a plant that will go up a tree. There is mixed commentary about this one. Some people are saying you can grow it up a pole. A lot of people, however, are saying that this is one that is a scrambler, and from what I'm seeing that it wants to do here, it's not looking like it's going upwards, it's looking like it's going along. So I would tend to believe that. There's a slight story with this plant is that I had bought another one that had a single leaf and it was rooting in pon, and I was just getting used to pon at that point. So I was really, really worried because at some point a terracotta pot fell and snapped that leaf entirely off, and I'm just like, no. I tried reconnecting the leaf to the petiole because it kind of snapped in the middle of the petiole. It didn't really take, but eventually that brought out a new leaf. But before that, I was freaking out and going, I got a really good deal on that Plough Maniai, and I can't believe I've missed out again. But then another really, really good deal on this Plough Maniai came in with just this one leaf. That's why I put it right at the back on a lower shelf, mainly because nothing can fall on top of it then. But both of them have since bounced back. The other one has grown a couple of new leaves. That one's very silvery, and that one's much more of a traditional Plough Maniai that you might see. I don't also know whether or not Plough Maniai will lose some of its silver banding when it starts getting more mature, and maybe because this started with quite a mature leaf, whether or not that's the reason why the banding wasn't there. But I still like the pillowy shape of the leaves, and I'll bring it in a bit closer. You can see there's very little of that silveriness on the leaves, but very much looks very pillowy, so I quite like it. But yeah, that's another one. I'll put this back and grab the next plant. So the next plant, and penultimate, I think there's one more to go after this one. This is a very long video. I do apologise, but hopefully you're enjoying it. Hey, by the way, any questions that you might have for any of these plants in terms of what I do for their care or my experiences with them, do drop them in the comments down below. Love to have that conversation. Right, so this is another one that I'm going to have to hold up. And you might struggle a bit to realise what plant this is based on some of these lower leaves, some of the more mature leaves that are kind of pretty green. This might give you a bit more of an indication as to what plant this is. And most definitely its newest leaf, you should be able to tell what plant this is. This is a Philodendron Painted Lady. And it's got the pinkish, peachish petioles and stem as well. You can see another one that's growing. This again was the top of the shelf, but because of that shade cloth, I'm assuming that might be why I'm getting these really, really long petioles on the leaves. But a very, very cool plant. I have also chopped and propped this once before. I think it might be due for another one of those. But the propagations are growing quite nicely. I can already see that there's another growth point. I don't know whether or not you might be able to see if I bring my hand there. So you might be able to see it's right there. That's getting ready to kind of activate soon. So I think as soon as I take that cutting, that will activate quite quickly. It's also, if I'm not mistaken, there's a side branch, that's the other leaf that you can see here, that's coming off the side branch because a very, very low point activated, and there's another stem that's coming out at the bottom. So very, very cool plant, massively underrated, those leaves. I was the same, like I found this at a good deal a couple of years ago now, and I picked it up and it was much, much smaller plant. And I was a bit like, I don't know, but it's an okay price, so I'll pick it up and see what happens. So glad I did. Very difficult to put across, even in video, definitely in pictures, but very difficult in either video or pictures to get across how cool these leaves are. They do very much look like an oil painting, thus the name Painted Lady. So if you are thinking about finding or getting one of these, I'd say definitely grab one if you find one at a price that suits you, essentially. But yeah, very, very cool. This one is still in terracotta, and it's still in a light, airy, aroid soil mix. Interestingly enough, the propagation that I had of this was getting so heavy that it kept tipping down the pot with the soil. So that's now, yesterday actually, got moved into pond. So I could always give you an update on how that's doing in pond in a few weeks' time, basically. But yeah, lovely, lovely Philodendron Painted Lady. Right, let me pick up the last plant and we can have a look at that as well. Right, the last plant is, you might be able to see in front of me, is the Philodendron Melanocrism. And this is quite a bushy, large plant at this point, so I will hold it for as long as I can, but I might move it down at some point. You might be able to see the last leaf is quite large. It's got a new leaf coming in and the arrow roots are growing quite nicely. That is going to be the point where I'm going to chop off and give this to a planty friend who's also got a Melanocrism, but the leaves have stayed juvenile for a very long time, so she'd want to start off with a slightly more mature leaf, so I thought I'd give her a cutting. This is in, try to not chop up the plant. This is in terracotta in my light, airy, aroid soil mix. And yeah, it's just been growing super well. This is one that I chopped up for the Instagram giveaway that I had a few months back now, actually. And it has since bushed up considerably. It only had like 4 or 5 leaves at that point in one stem. And it's got 1, 2, 3, 4 growth points now off the main stem. And they're all pushing out massive, massive leaves. Just to give you an idea of head test there. But yeah, very, very cool plant. I will put this down and wrap up the video, however, because this is exceptionally heavy. So bear with me for 2 seconds. Right, and wrapping things up. Again, apologies, this is a particularly long video. Everybody was just like, just do a full tour. And I'm just like, we'd be here for a couple of hours because I do like to take off each of the plants and tell you a bit more about each of them, essentially. So I think shelves is probably going to be the easiest way of doing it for now, anyway. So yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to cover today. Hopefully you've enjoyed. Apologies again for being absent for a couple of weeks. But as I said, content should be a bit more frequent, a bit more regular now on. As always, I'll try to post at least, I think I'm kind of getting into the groove of twice a week at the moment. So usually it will be a Tuesday and a Thursday most times, basically. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. If you've got any questions, comments, do drop them down below. Love to have that conversation with you. And yeah, hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.